Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be talking about our food manufacturing in today's webinar. So first, I want to talk to everyone and remind everyone about our Fourlane YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com/Fourlane. We have a ton of videos out here. I've had some clients tell me that they have been using those kind of like a library resource. So definitely subscribe. You can also be notified every time a new video comes out. So it's really cool. And also share with your friends, family, other business partners, things like that, so that they can have all this knowledge at their fingertips as well. And then I also want to remind everyone about our Facebook group. You can find us at Fourlane QuickBooks Enterprise. We have a ton of information. Sometimes we like to get some feedback on some topics for these webinars as well. So feel free to join us and ask questions there. I want to remind everyone, and if you don't know, I do want to notify you that we do have Fourlane on-demand support. It is something that we have really enjoyed offering to our clients. It starts at $25 per QuickBooks user per month for up to 5 users. Then it drops to $20 per month for 6 or more users. And we have staff on hand that, you will get someone here that works at Fourlane, and they'll be able to kind of pick up where you left off or have all of your information of what we have been working with you on, hopefully for years and years. So take advantage. You can contact us if you have any questions. And it's exciting. It is coming up. What's new in 2023? On September 7th and September the 14th, our very own Marjorie Adams will be having her webinar about what's new. So sign up. That registration link is available. We are very, very excited to always have this available to our clients and let people see the new features so that you can take advantage of those, paying for that subscription. So might as well take advantage of the really cool things that are coming out. All right, so today I have some lovely ladies with me that are going to talk about our food manufacturing. So I've got Catherine. She's joined me a couple of times, and welcoming you back. Lori, a partner here at Fourlane, and Alicia as well. So got 2 Alicias, double trouble on this webinar, and very excited, Alicia, that you could join us. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and start asking some questions. We're going to talk through QuickBooks, and I'm going to go ahead and ask my first question to Lori. So, we've worked with some pretty cool clients over the years, I think, and I would love to have you kind of tell us what is some of the coolest food manufacturing clients that you've worked with.
So one of them there's 3 that come to mind. Okay. But one of them that I think was probably the most, well, I can't say the most. So let me just say one of the 3, they actually deal in specialty foods, like very high-end specialty foods. And it's a scenario where they buy in one unit, right? But they have to sell in other units, but because it's by weight, those units are never consistent. So walking through that was really fun, and it's e-com, so that added another dynamic into that. So we had to use multiple units of measure for them, but also how do they write off the difference, right? Because if they are buying and selling in weight, but that weight is different for each single unit, what does that look like for them? Because that was a big ask for them. So it was a fun one to work with.
I bet so. That's really cool. It's always fun for me to have those clients that are like, yeah, I don't think QuickBooks can do,
Exactly.
the multiple units measure. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, it's so much fun, right? And then you get here and we show them and they're like, oh, yes, this is exactly what I need. So
Right.
I definitely have had that experience too. And it's fun when they get excited about it.
Right.
Well, really cool. Catherine, do you have any really cool clients you want to kind of share with us?
Yeah, I've had a couple that I've really enjoyed working with because, like Lori said, there's always a fun element of problem solving. So one of my favorites that I worked with is a manufacturer of coffee. And as you can imagine, coffee people are up early, so they were almost always my first client. And so I was drinking my coffee when I was on the call with them, and they did not like the fact that I was drinking another brand of coffee. So they actually educated me a little bit, and I started drinking their coffee and still do to this day. So I got to learn about their product while sampling it, which was super fun. Another cool client I have manufactures flavors that go into many of the, foods and beverages that are pretty well known. So it's kind of interesting to see how flavors are produced, because you don't think about how complex it is to make something taste like an orange or a margarita or lemonade. So that's been really interesting to learn about as well.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Yeah. I do recall, and this is one of the things in our line of work, right, where sometimes it's like if we are talking to them early in the morning or like around lunch and they're food related, you're like, oh, you're making me hungry. But I definitely remember you talking about the coffee client and all the different flavors. So it's
Yes.
really unique to be able to experience those. Um, I don't know who wants to jump on this. So I will let the first person, because I think we all have like, and I know you can't see my air quotes, but large, really large food manufacturers. Does anyone want to share one that they've worked with us?
Well, I think large is not necessarily the same for all of them, because we've got
Hmm.
some that they're a what we might list as a smaller manufacturing facility, but they reach a large number of people because their target customers are like Costco, Walmart, Sam's, that sort of thing. So it's
Hmm.
that to me is an interesting dynamic. But then we also
Mhm.
have some that they have multiple manufacturing facilities, and and they have a more specific
Mhm.
clientele. So it's just interesting how that large can be different things.
Right, exactly. And it allows, right, for people to be able to see, you don't have to be that mom and pop shop in order to use QuickBooks, right? You can have that customer base at Sam's and Costco and Walmart and Amazon, right? I mean, we live in different times now, so even the ones that, like you said, have, manufacturing facilities all over the world, right?
Mhm.
Um, Catherine, I know there was one that we worked with together, and trying not to get the name out, but were they Italian?
They were from Italy, so they were a manufacturer of gelato, as would be fitting for an Italian company, who was
Hmm.
also owned by a large multinational company. So they were the United States manufacturing branch of this company that's based in Italy. And so while they themselves were a relatively tight-knit group handling the distribution of this product in the United States, they reported up and had big company problems because they, of course, had to report up to their large company. They were just a subsidiary. So it was really interesting to learn about their reporting requirements, how they handled the complexities with getting product over from the EU here in the United States, and how they managed and fulfilled orders. So their clients, for example, weren't individual consumers. They were selling to other grocery stores, restaurants, other wholesale businesses. So it was really interesting to see how we can take a really large company and turn that kind of food distribution into a really successful workflow in QuickBooks.
Yeah, that was fun to be a part of for sure. Definitely made you want to go eat some gelato.
Which I did. I wasn't shy about that.
Well, Alicia, I want to ask you, about some complex food manufacturing processes that you've had to work with, and kind of what solutions you found for those.
Well, one of the companies that we've worked with, they made soup, and so they had different restaurants. So they made soup for their restaurants, and then they also made soup that can be bought at like Costco. So it was trying to educate them on being able to utilize Assemblies to basically put their recipe for the soup and build it all within QuickBooks. So we would use an assembly that was kind of the base of the ingredients, the base of the recipe, and then creating sub-assemblies to have those different layers of the different flavors, because their soups were changing all the time and they were experimenting with different ingredients and trying to make it as simple as we could with all of the variety and all the changes that they were continuing to do all the time with the different varieties of soup that they were making.
So basically, you kind of took that base, maybe if it's a chicken noodle soup, and not saying that it was, but just trying to give some examples. I went to chicken noodle soup because I'm freezing right now, and it's not even like cold where I'm at. But that base foundation, so we can create that base assembly, and then we call it a nested assembly because we build that within another assembly, very similar to what I'm sharing on my screen, even though it's not, chicken noodle soup. And so just building that base, I bet, gave them so much more flexibility, because they could create that and then they could add other things to it. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Does anyone else have any other kind of stories like that they want to share? Being able to, take things like Alicia was saying, and how we were able to find the other solutions.
I'll share one. It's kind of interesting when you learn about the manufacturing process of these food production operations, that you're learning, like, well, how do you make that? Like, how do you make soup? And one of the things I had a client get really tripped up on was the packaging. And they had actually originally set up their assemblies so that there were different assemblies for each variation of packaging it could go out the door on. So whether it was, a gallon or a half gallon, or, a single size portion. And what we tested and what we designed was using the concept of these nested assemblies to say, okay, well, first you have to make the product as one step. And then as a second step, you package that product, and then it goes out the door in that finished state. So kind of looking at the full view of tracking a product from, its raw material state through a whip state and then to its final finished good as a packaged product, was really an interesting process to work with them on. There was a lot of learning that had to go through that, to be able to kind of trace back what's happening in reality. to how we could translate that back into QuickBooks through Assemblies.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna add to that a little bit. I think it's really, really important to make sure we understand the process. So when we're asking questions, it's so that we're getting educated as well, so that we can make those, make it better, right, on how to record it in QuickBooks so it's mimicking what is actually happening on the floor. So I think that's a great call out, Kathy.
Yeah, that's the fun part of making that real, like kind of real time numbers and what happens in the real world. That's what I always tell my clients. What happens in the real world, we want to show inside the system. And I want to be able to show some things that you were talking about with these build assemblies, because this is an example of like the raw components, right? So we take our formulas, our ingredients, our if we're making a huge batch of tortillas, right? We're taking that flour, that water, we're creating that batch, and then QuickBooks behind the scenes is able to do everything it needs to do. And the accounting just naturally happens, right? And so as Catherine was saying, it's taking it from kind of that raw inventory and turning it into that finished good, which is really cool. And it's just one single step that we potentially may have to do in order to show this in the system. And so that's really nice to be able to show. And I'm going to ask, and then Catherine, I'm going to ask you, just because you're talking about packaging, how do we solve for packaging on, like, you know, my ingredients? Is that a whole nother step, or how would you solve for that?
Well, it as always in consulting, it depends, right? It depends on on the process and what you're trying to get to. Oftentimes, what you will have, for example, in my coffee client, you know, we walked through the step of going from a green bean that's a roasted bean and then becomes a flavored bean and a ground bean, and then you end up with a quantity of ground and flavored roasted coffee beans. Now those go in a big tote, and then the final process of that is, well, now we would take the weight, because they dealt in weight, and put it in the different packages. So we might turn some into 1 pound bags, some into 5 pound bags, 4-ounce single servings. But we're starting with that process of making the ground and roasted coffee. And then from there, we do a separate assembly, a separate step to turn that into its finished good, so that we can always see on our inventory list the quantity of our finished manufactured parts that are ready to go out the door. So in that case, we did a series of nested assemblies to build the product up, so that our final step of the process was my ground and roasted coffee plus the bag plus the label. And that then became the finished product there.
So it's okay to have, as part of your assembly, and I was trying to show there, right, in our item list, right, we can have packaging here.
Absolutely.
We can have the different stages, we can show those things. And that way we're really able to get the true cost of our product and how we're manufacturing, where we know maybe we need to cut back a little, where we're making more of a profit too. So that's really cool. And you mentioned labels and things like that as well. I had a client that had very specialty packaging, and they put, you know, a super nice bow. They were able to put, you know, like the box that their product sat in had like satin in it. And so that was something that they did inventory, and it did add a lot of cost. So if they would have left that out, it definitely would not have given them, you know, enough to see their true profitability when they're running, you know, their sales by item summary report to see, where they're making their money.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Packaging is a lot of cost of a product. You can't just hand people raw coffee beans and send them out their way to hold in their hands. It has to go out the door in a package. And all too often we kind of forget that as the final step of manufacturing is, well, what does it look like when it leaves the door?
Right.
And so adding in that cost for boxes and bags and labels and bottles, all of those things do add to the cost and can be built in at any stage that's appropriate in the manufacturing process in the assemblies.
You can also add in manufacturing, like electricity, if you can come up with a formula for that cost per hour, you can add those into there as well. So you're not only capturing the cost of the those external things, but you're also just the cost of doing business in there too.
Great point. Great point, Lori. Yeah. Sometimes people don't think of that. And then you have, and it kind of goes back to who we were talking about, those large clients, right? As you were saying, and you have those clients where they're like, my manufacturing facilities, they cost a lot to generate and to run, and the machines. And so we need to take that into consideration as well.
Right.
Great point. So I'm hoping that this is a fun one. And I just want to remind all of our attendees that if you have any questions for us, feel free to put those questions in. We try to get back to you on the webinar. If we aren't able to answer it, we'll try to respond to you directly, or we may follow up. But you can always ask any questions. So I'm hoping that this will be a fun one, and maybe hit someone that's out there and go, oh my goodness, like that is me, and you just helped me solve. So, we have a lot of clients come to us and we hear a lot of struggles, right? What are some of, Alicia, what are some of the struggles you may hear from clients that come in the industry?
Well, it kind of goes back to some of the ones that we've kind of already talked about, and as far as like, putting assemblies together and how to actually create them and what is it supposed to look like. Also, dealing with units of measure and trying to get that in there properly. So it's usually a lot of conversation back and forth, a lot of, testing within their file, having them, giving them a sandbox file to play around with so that we are looking at their data in a test environment so they can say, this is working, this is not working, we tried something here and that didn't quite work. So, my experience is usually more in trying to help them, build the actual file, like putting that file together for them to use. So the design part and that conversation piece is usually happening before the file gets to me to get them a finished product. So Catherine may have a little bit more, Lori may have a little bit better examples exactly of how that happens.
Yeah, Lori, Catherine, do y'all want to add to that?
Sure. So, I'm sorry, Catherine.
Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Well, so taking that, right, listening, right? Sometimes it's even listening for what is not being said, because it's timing. A lot of it is understanding what they're actually doing, because sometimes the way they're doing it on the floor cannot work as well in QuickBooks, or the timing on the floor is off because they're not turning their stuff in. And so it's kind of listening to what they're saying and or not saying, and then utilizing all the stuff we've talked about on how do we get that to let the system do the hard work so that we can do everything else.
Right.
I think to add to that, the biggest thing that I try to facilitate for production teams or manufacturing teams is communication so that our teams are not siloed. And that's one of the biggest things that I encounter, especially if you are kind of a spread out facility where the person who's handling the receiving doesn't necessarily talk to the person all the time who's entering in the assemblies or the production for that day. And those people have very little interaction on a day-to-day basis with the person whose job it is to create the invoices and actually, fulfill that inventory. So we have to have those checks and balances in place, and we all have to have the tools to understand that, Jane in accounts receivable can't create an invoice if John in production hasn't built the assembly, and John in production can't build the assembly if Doug in the warehouse hasn't received the product. Nobody
Right.
can do their job, and no one is going to be successful if we don't all have the tools to get us there. So facilitating that process and really understanding the order that things have to be done in and the process that QuickBooks is looking for in QuickBooks is such an important part of the design process. So not only is it understanding, like Alicia said, like the technical side of it with the units of measure and the recipes and doing the testing, it's making sure that our team is on board with the dynamics that might be changing because we are improving our process for manufacturing.
Right. Y'all just brought up, and I think that was a huge tip, right? That, I always try to make sure I'm sharing with my clients as well, and mimicking that real world and, putting it into QuickBooks. I mean, it can be a reality, right? And so going to the homepage, I know we've been on here for a little bit, but it kind of makes sense to, what we're all talking about. Sales orders to purchasing to receiving, right? Then our inventory's in, then we're able to build these things. And this is the manufacturing, heart within QuickBooks is like building these. And then we have that ability to invoice, right? To go ahead and invoice. And so there's a ton of reports that we would be able to use, like setting up things in different inventory sites, right? So I like to, kind of give examples of things where inventory sites are kind of a big deal if we're wanting to see, for example, like different stages of the manufacturing process, right? So if we can envision like these sites being, like a dry warehouse where our ingredients are stored, or the cooler where the cold things are stored, right? Or like even if it's having to go through packaging, as it was mentioned earlier. So those are all things where we can build based off of our sites and how it can mimic in the real world exactly what happens inside of the system, inside of QuickBooks. And that gives us our real-time information, right? And so y'all really kind of tied that up in a bow for a huge one tip, right? So never I guess never rule out QuickBooks for full-blown food manufacturing process, just like it can handle everything else in all the other industries. Well, that is really cool. I know we are getting really close to time, so I definitely want to go back to remind everyone of what we have coming up next, and just thank everyone for joining us. So up next in our webinar series, we've got the law firm Filevine accounting terminologies. Again, don't forget about September 7th and the 14th of what's new, and drop us something on our Facebook page if there's anything else that you would like to learn and for us to cover. And again, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today.